You're getting ready to stop at a red light and you feel your car jolt forward. It's the feeling like a wall was catapulted into your back bumper. The force pushes you into the car in front of you, your airbags deploy, and it's all over in a second. Thankfully, you don't have any serious injuries, but you do need some medical care and follow-up physical therapy. But later on, you find out that the driver that hit you had no insurance. Well, what about your medical bills and your physical therapy and follow-up? Even if you have health insurance, what if you have a high deductible on your health insurance policy? Are you expected to shoulder all of those costs for an accident that you didn't cause? Well, there is coverage in your auto policy that can help here, and we do see aspects of it overlooked from time to time. Coming up, the number 3 most overlooked coverage in auto policies that we see on this episode of the How Insurance Works podcast.
Welcome to the How Insurance Works podcast. The content in this podcast should not be considered insurance advice and is for general informational purposes only. Insurance forms and endorsements vary based on insurance company, changes in addition dates, regulations, court decisions, and state jurisdiction. So please consult your agent for further advice. And now back to How Insurance Works with Mike McGilvery.
Welcome to the How Insurance Works podcast. Thank you for tuning in. If we have not yet met here, my name is Mike McGilvery. I'm a second-generation licensed agent and broker at Shaw, Moses, Mendenhall & Associates in Southern California. My goal is simple. It's to help educate and inform on various aspects of insurance and the insurance industry in the hope that it might help you make better informed decisions. As we did in our last episode, we're continuing a mini-series on the most overlooked coverages that we see in auto policies from our experience. This is by no means a statistically verified list. It's simply the coverages that we see overlooked the most in auto policies with working with new clients. Now, often these are clients that might have purchased their auto policies on their own online. Maybe they hadn't had the help of an agent or broker while they were putting their auto program together. So oftentimes when we're working with new clients that haven't had help from an agent or broker before, these are a lot of the coverages that we need to educate clients on. So what happens in a situation like the one we alluded to in the beginning of the podcast? You're in a fairly serious auto accident caused by another driver, but you find out that that driver has no insurance. Maybe he has a little bit of insurance, maybe he has no insurance, but are you going to have to shoulder all of the costs for this accident that wasn't your fault? Well, you shouldn't have to, and we hope you won't have to, because the right coverage can help with this, and it's number 3 in our most overlooked auto coverages in auto policies, and that coverage is uninsured, underinsured motorist coverage. And we're going to discuss uninsured, underinsured motorist coverage. And in the scope of the discussion, we're also going to discuss another related coverage that's important to consider in your auto policies, and that is called a waiver of collision deductible or a collision deductible waiver, which is important to look at and explore as we're discussing uninsured, underinsured motorist. And as we like to do at How Insurance Works, we're also going to cite a real-life example to help illustrate the benefits of uninsured, underinsured motorist coverage and the collision deductible waiver or waiver of collision deductible. So what is uninsured, underinsured motorist coverage? Well, there's a lot of semantics behind the coverage, so we're going to try to keep things as simple as we can in this podcast. Uninsured motorist coverage is also called UM coverage, and underinsured motorist coverage is also called UIM coverage. Now, both of these coverages will pay for your medical bills and other expenses, not only for you, but the passengers in your car if you're hit by a driver that either has no insurance or doesn't carry enough insurance. Unfortunately, there are a lot of drivers out there that don't carry insurance. On the video version of this podcast, we're going to be showing a screenshot of the following statistics. You can watch the video version of the podcast in a few different places at howinsuranceworks.co on our Facebook page, How Insurance Works, or on our Instagram page at how_insurance_works. Now, according to the Insurance Research Council statistics from 2019, some of the highest percentages of uninsured drivers are in Mississippi, with 29.4% of drivers uninsured. Michigan, 25.5% of drivers are uninsured. In Florida, 20.4% of drivers. And in my state, in California, 16.6% of drivers are uninsured. New 2021 statistics from the Insurance Research Council noted that nationwide, about 1 in 8 drivers are uninsured. That means they don't have any coverage at all, not just not enough to help cover you, but just no insurance at all. Unfortunately, there are just a lot more drivers out there that are underinsured. They do have insurance, but the insurance that they carry are usually at the state minimum limits or whatever's required in that state, which unfortunately are not usually adequate enough in a lot of different claims situations. So if you're hit by a driver that doesn't have insurance or doesn't have enough insurance, we did talk about your medical expenses. I think that's one that's obvious that people think about, but what other expenses can uninsured or underinsured motorist coverage help you with? Well, number one, lost wages if you or any of your passengers can't work because of the accident. Compensation for mental anguish, for pain, for suffering. And I hate to say this, but it is a reality. It can also, funeral expenses is one thing that uninsured, underinsured motorist coverage can help with. Not a pleasant topic to think about, but it is a reality. Uninsured, underinsured motorist coverage is typically used to help pay your medical bills and your passengers' medical bills, potential lost wages, compensation for pain and suffering. Now, you may be thinking, well, I have my own health insurance. My passengers would also have their own health insurance. So wouldn't my health insurance just take care of everything for me? Well, the answer is yes, it likely would. But what if you have fairly high deductibles in your health insurance policy that have to be paid out first? What if your passengers have really high deductibles in their health insurance policies? Should you have to pay those deductibles out of pocket to meet your deductible requirement for an accident that you didn't cause? Now, keep in mind your health insurance also won't compensate you for potential lost wages, for pain and suffering, or for funeral expenses. So uninsured, underinsured motorist coverage still might make sense for you to look at because it's going to cover the deductibles in your health insurance policy, lost wages, compensation for pain and suffering, and again, the funeral expenses, though that's not a pleasant topic to bring up, it is a reality. Now, when the uninsured, underinsured motorist coverage is exhausted, your health insurance will likely continue to pick up from there, but at least your deductibles will be paid. Now, what about the damage done to your car? Somebody that doesn't have any insurance or doesn't have enough insurance hits your car. How do you get your car fixed? And if you're thinking about that, I'm glad you are, and we are going to get to that in a little bit. Now, how much uninsured, underinsured motorist coverage can you get? Well, this is one of the areas that we often see is overlooked. Now, with some clients that we work with that are new and they haven't had an agent or broker to work with in the past, a lot of times we'll see that they have adequate liability limits for themselves if they hit somebody. For example, they might have $250,000, $500,000, or perhaps $100,000, $300,000. But we'll see that the limits they have for uninsured, underinsured motorists are typically a lot lower. They might be $25,000 or $50,000. And it's generally recommended to keep the limits in your underinsured, uninsured motorist coverage the same as your own liability limits if you hit somebody. So when you see bodily injury liability or property damage, and you see that $100,000/$300,000 or $250,000/$500,000, those are your own limits if you hit someone. But it's advisable to keep your uninsured, underinsured motorist limits about the same, and it doesn't cost much to raise your uninsured, underinsured auto limits. But let's talk about this typical situation we see. We see very adequate limits for bodily injury liability, the $100,000, $300,000, the $250,000, $500,000 if you hit somebody. But we'll see that situation where we'll look at their uninsured, underinsured motorist coverage and it'll be $25,000, $50,000. So let's talk about that situation a little bit more for a second. A limit of $25,000, $50,000 for uninsured, underinsured motorist coverage. So what this means is that if you're hit by a driver that doesn't have enough insurance or has no insurance, you have up to $25,000 per person in coverage. That's what that first number means before the slash. And you have $50,000 maximum per every one accident. That's what that second number means after the slash. Now, if you're the only passenger in the car, that means you have up to $25,000 in coverage to take care of your medical expenses, lost wages, compensation for pain and suffering. But what if you were seriously injured? Maybe you're out of work for 3 to 6 months. Maybe your health plan has those high deductibles. Would $25,000 for you be enough? It might be. It might not be. Everybody's situation is a little bit different. But exploring this coverage a little bit more in detail is certainly worth doing. Now, what if you have 3 other passengers in the car? So now we have a total of 4 people. We have yourself and 3 passengers. Well, using the same limits for uninsured, underinsured motorist of $25,000/$50,000, we have a maximum limit, that $50,000, of $50,000 for the entire accident. So each person in the car wouldn't get $25,000. That's the most you can get if you're the only one in the car. But since we have 4 people in the car and we have 1 accident, the $50,000 has to be divided equally. Has to be divided between you and your other passengers in the car. So $50,000 divided by 4 is $12,500. That's the amount of money each person will get. So remember that first number, the $25,000, is per person per car. That's the maximum per person. The second number is the maximum per accident, which means in a situation where we have $50,000, if you have 4 passengers in the car, including yourself, divide that by 4, everybody gets $12,500. So is that going to be enough? What happens if somebody's seriously injured, out of work for 3 to 6 months? Is that going to be enough coverage? Now, I do also want to mention here that in some states, uninsured or underinsured motorist coverage is required to be offered to you, but you have the option to reject that in writing. In other states, uninsured motorist coverage is required at different amounts, so check with your own state's requirements. Now, without uninsured, underinsured motorist coverage, of course, you can always try to sue the driver of the car, but do you want to pay out of pocket to hire an attorney as well as pay legal fees, maybe even if it's temporarily, just to go through the inconvenience of a lawsuit, especially after a traumatic event? The uninsured, underinsured motorist coverage makes that process easier to deal with for everyone. Now, I alluded to this earlier in the podcast, but what about the damage done to your car if you're hit by a driver that either doesn't have enough insurance or doesn't have any insurance? He has no insurance to help you fix your car. Remember, we mentioned the primary purpose of underinsured, uninsured motorist coverage is to take care of your medical bills, your lost wages, compensation for pain and suffering. So what about that damage to your car? Well, that is actually going to be covered under the collision coverage in your auto policy. It's the same coverage that would take care of you if you hit someone or if you hit something. Now, in a situation where you hit someone, you'll often have to pay a deductible for your own car to fix it. For a lot of us, $500 or $1,000 is an average deductible. But in the case you didn't cause the accident because you were hit by another driver, why should you have to pay out of pocket for a deductible to fix your car as a result of an accident you didn't cause? Again, you shouldn't, and we hope you don't. To avoid having to pay your deductible to fix your car, in the case a driver hits you that has no insurance or is underinsured, if that driver is identifiable, you want to make sure you have the collision deductible waiver on your policy. This waives your $500 or $1,000 collision deductible so that if you have to get your car fixed under your collision coverage, you're not out of pocket to have to pay that deductible. The collision deductible waiver on your policy will waive that deductible for you. I have this coverage on my own policy. I'll show you a snapshot of this on the video of the podcast. I pay $2.41 every 6 months for the waiver of collision deductible coverage. So it's very affordable with most insurance companies to add to your policy. Now, for those watching the video, you'll also notice if you see this screenshot, it shows that I have declined uninsured motorist property damage coverage. This is also called UMPD. Now, why is this declined? We're going to talk more about UMPD in a later podcast because some aspects of that coverage can be complex, but for now, I'm going to provide some basic information about it. I declined UMPD, uninsured motorist property damage, because I already have collision coverage. UMPD coverage is applicable if you don't have collision coverage. Now, some people elect not to have collision coverage. Most of the time it's because their car's old and the Blue Book value is only a couple $1,000s. It's not worth having the collision coverage. But if you didn't have collision coverage on your policy and an uninsured or underinsured driver hits you, remember we have no collision, that is where you can use UMPD coverage, uninsured motorist property damage. And at least it provides you something. In most states, it provides you $3,500. That's it. That's the maximum you can get on UMPD. The problem is with a lot of modern cars, that may not be enough to fix a bumper with all the sensors and cameras on modern bumpers. So in most cases, you would have UMPD coverage if you don't have collision. However, because most people have a loan on their car or are leasing their car, collision coverage is usually required, so you're likely going to have collision coverage anyway. What doesn't make sense is to carry both collision coverage and UMPD. If you're in that situation, you may want to talk to your agent about whether or not you really need that UMPD coverage. Instead, you can do something similar to what I did on my policy. I declined UMPD because I have a waiver of collision deductible. Now, to end the podcast, I wanted to just give a real-life example of a situation where a collision deductible waiver was used and where uninsured, underinsured motorist coverage would be applicable. A family member of mine was recently hit by an uninsured driver, and that family member was the fourth car in the accident. It was a 4-car wreck, happened on the freeway. In the video version of this podcast, I'll show a summary of the statement. You'll see vehicles number 1 through number 4. My family member was in number 4. Vehicle number 1, the driver had no insurance. He hit vehicle number 2, which hit vehicle number 3, which hit vehicle number 4. That was my family member's car. It was a 2019 Ford Ranger, and we'll show the estimated cost of his repairs. Thankfully, he was okay. His bumper did get damaged. The cost was $8,387.82, and he was the fourth car that got hit. So again, thankfully, he was okay. He didn't need to use his uninsured, underinsured motorist coverage to take care of any injuries or lost wages. Now, the driver that hit everyone had no insurance. My family member was able to claim the repairs under his collision coverage, and he had the waiver of collision deductible, so he didn't have to pay his deductible for that. If he didn't have collision coverage and he only had UMPD, he would have, that's again, uninsured motorist property damage, he would have only received $3,500 for a repair that cost $8,387.82. So unfortunately, the driver of Vehicle 2 was taken away in a stretcher, was seriously injured. The driver of Vehicle 3 had injuries as well. Most importantly, we do hope that they ended up being okay. We do also hope that they had uninsured, underinsured motorist coverage to help them. Even if they had medical insurance, they may have had high deductibles on their medical insurance policy. If they were out of work for several months as a result of serious injuries, again, the medical insurance is not going to cover that. Uninsured, underinsured motorist coverage will, in addition to their own pain and suffering and whatever they had to go through. So this isn't quite a pleasant topic to talk about, but it is reality. My own family member was hit by an uninsured driver just last year, and we alluded to some statistics about how many uninsured drivers there are throughout the country in the beginning of this podcast. There are far more that do have insurance, but they have the minimum required limits, which often isn't enough to take care of us in a claim situation. So to best protect yourself, please review your uninsured, underinsured auto limits with your agent. And if you don't have an agent or broker to help, please do consider speaking with one. Have them review your auto insurance program. We hope this podcast was helpful to you. You can find the video version of this podcast at howinsurancworks.co, our Facebook page, How Insurance Works, or our Instagram at how_insurance_works. Stay safe out there. Again, we hope this podcast was helpful, and we'll see you on the next one.